here we go. Avengers Endgame is finally here, and through 3 hours of runtime and no intermission, my legs might not have enjoyed much of it, but I certainly did. 22 movies, 11 years, and the Avengers finally get the chance to kick Thanos' obscenely sedentary ass. Congratulations, Marvel, you've did it. Now you can glide effortlessly into the next stage of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there will be no problems whatsoever. Ah, Yes, there's a whole lot of questions coming into Phase 4. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's just analyze Endgame itself for a moment. Let me preface this by saying I enjoyed Endgame. It's a fun movie and there are many individual pieces that worked very well. I commend the effort to bring a satisfying completion of the original Avengers character arcs. That being said, there were some shortcomings that were hard to swallow. I found that Iron Man was pulled at each direction with his own domestic life between Pepper and then taking Peter Parker under his wing. It seemed off-color to have him die rather than retire from the Avengers, which seemed to align more with all the buildup of Tony becoming more family-oriented. See, him making the ultimate sacrifice is a bit cliché for superheroes. Tony hasn't really struggled with that sort of choice in recent movies, more so he struggled to let go of the Avengers. It seemed perfectly fitting that, at the end of Endgame, he would do so, and finally move on to his next stage in life. Basically, Steve should trade endings with Tony. I also think Thor was underutilized and demoted too much into comic relief for this film. The ongoing struggle between Hulk and Bruce Banner evaporated without any sort of payoff. And the most egregious move of them all, Thanos no longer has the Infinity Stones. While the intent for this turn in development was to make the decimation seem irreversible, it just reduced Thanos into a non-entity ultimately. Infinity War was my favorite movie in the Marvel franchise, and no small part of it was owing to the Infinity Stones themselves. It was such a thrill to see Thanos collect all the Infinity Stones and power up to absurd proportions. It's not that there was no narrative justification for Thanos destroying the Infinity Stones. It was more about the spectacle. Personally, I kinda envisioned the last remaining Avengers facing off against the most powerful being of all time with 6 Infinity Stones. And we really didn't get that story in Endgame. It was a vast deviation from what was expected, and I don't believe for the better. I think it was a bit of a letdown. Again, not dissing the creative direction of Endgame, having the Avengers be the ones to collect the Infinity Stones is a clever role reversal with Thanos. My complaints are not about the story elements themselves, but how effectively they're utilized. The trip in time starts with fairly little established stakes. Before Thanos from the past enters the picture, the team failing to get all the stones would result in either A, returning home without undoing the snap, or B, being stuck in the past. The ironic thing about that is it's either a net neutral or a net positive, because remember, the present sucks and no one except maybe Iron Man wants to be there as it stands anyway. This is why the stones are so important. Not too long ago, Marvel had Endgame listed as Infinity War Part 2, and I think I understand now with the release of Endgame the choice to change that title. To put it simply, the Infinity Stones didn't have enough oomph. Every time all 6 of them were combined, they were either used to snap something out of existence, snap the same thing back into existence, or snap another thing out of existence. Sure, I can't downplay the significance of wiping half the life of the universe out and bringing it all back with the snap of the fingers, but there has to be more utility on display for all the buildup about what these things are capable of when put together. I had high hopes to see the complete set of Infinity Stones in battle. I mean, take the story out of the equation for a second, and just imagine the jaw-dropping cinematography of another duel with the stones. The VFX in Infinity War was impeccable. The best scene in the whole movie was when Doctor Strange fought against Thanos on his own. Keep in mind, at that point, Thanos only had 2 Infinity Stones, but it was such a marvelous spectacle that just blew my mind. It was such a magnificent display of all this power the two of them held at their fingertips. It was Infinity Stones versus Infinity Stone. It was sensational. The fact that Endgame script didn't allow for another round of movie magic to that caliber is a damn shame. Infinity War set everything up so immaculately. I came out of the theater so excited to see Thanos at full capacity and wondering how in the hell the Avengers were going to take down a being with the power of a god, basically. Thanos was always a bigger threat with the stones than the Decimation could ever hope to be, because he could do it again or do something even worse. This is a criminally large load off the Avengers' back by sheer luck. In story crafting, I'm under the opinion that when you concoct a scenario that is seemingly impossible to escape, you're in a gold mine. Don't bend and diminish the obstacles to make it easier. Double down! What if the Avengers didn't fight pre-snap Thanos? What if Thor didn't behead post-snap Thanos? And what if post-snap Thanos didn't destroy the main timeline's Infinity Stones? Now let's say post-snap Thanos is sitting smugly on his ass admiring his new toy. The Avengers wouldn't be too eager to rematch him directly, so they wait, maybe even give up altogether before Scott Lang comes back. Then, with the keys to time travel on their laps, they travel back in time to collect their own Infinity Stones to challenge Thanos once and for all. Speaking of time travel, are we going to talk about how Tony Stark basically invented it off of a whim? Even with the limited pin particles, this is still an incredibly powerful force the Avengers have at their disposal. I feel like this kind of ability is beyond the scope of pure scientific acumen. And there was no build-up for this. It came out of left field. There was nothing to suggest that the Avengers would be on the cusp of discovering how to manipulate time. Remember when I was talking about how the Infinity Stones didn't feature enough in Endgame? Well, this was the biggest missed opportunity of them all. The full set of Infinity Stones should have unlocked the door to time travel. And Thanos should have been heading the journey. He is the anchor to this story. That's the problem with Endgame. There's no sense of direction. There's no sense of understanding what the Avengers need to do next. This is what happens when you kill the antagonist in the first act. Thanos should have kept the stones, he should have been emboldened by his success, and had higher ambitions after the decimation. Marvel only tripped over their own 2 feet trying to keep Thanos in the anti-hero category. Remember in the climax of Endgame when pre-snap Thanos changed his objective to obliterate the entire universe and build it back from scratch? Imagine if post-snap Thanos, with all Infinity Stones, had that change of heart. On top of being 3,000 times more horrifying and substantial, it makes perfect sense. By this point in time, he would have a full movie with all 6 Infinity Stones, and that kind of limitless power would surely get to his head. Moreover, a broader role with the Infinity Stones gives us more information about what they are, where they came from, and what kind of limitations they have. When Bruce Banner tries to snag the Time Stone from the Ancient One, we get a snippet of information of their purpose and where they came from. But that's hardly sufficient. We need another 10 scenes like that before things start to make any sense. Establishing all these rules concretely is important for comprehension in the story. Personally, I have a lot of why questions. Why is Bruce Banner weakened by the gamma radiation the stones emit when he uses them? Why can the Infinity Stones erase anything, but only bring back select things? You know, barring the obvious answer that this would basically nullify the point of these films. Also, why is it that time travel can save people, but the stones can't? I'm gonna make a bold assumption and list out all the main objectives Marvel had for Endgame. Marvel wants the Avengers to have a rematch with Thanos. They want to bring back a majority of the cast with only specific heroes out of the picture. Marvel doesn't want the stones to be a magical resurrection machine, and they want to introduce the multiverse. The first 3 of these are pretty self-explanatory and I don't think require a whole lot of empirical data. The final one requires us to delve more into Phase 4 and what we know about it so far than Endgame itself. If you've been keeping up with Marvel's release schedule, you'll know that Spider-Man Far From Home is coming out in July. It'll be the first film for Phase 4 in the MCU. The first teaser trailer that dropped showed Quentin Beck, aka Mysterio, in it, where Nick Fury specifically said,
Beck is from Earth, just not ours. The snap tore a hole in our dimension.
So yeah, multiverse is happening. Also, which snap are you referring to now, Fury? Has no one informed you that enough people have taken a crack at snapping with the stones to form their own mariachi band? The first snap happened 5 years ago. There's no reason that this should be coming up now after the events of Endgame. It's mutually detrimental. Dentistry. It's mutually detrimental because Endgame is too important of a film to lack that sort of engagement into a new frontier and broaden the horizons of the MCU. Conversely, Far From Home is getting shafted by bearing all the responsibilities that were hastily shoved into its face. How is it supposed to continue from the close to the ground story of Homecoming if it needs to establish the multiverse and explain the absolute freight train of continuity problems picking up after a 5-year gap where around 50% of the population did not exist? Whether Far From Home can tie up all the loose ends or not is irrelevant. It shouldn't have to. This is born out of a sloppy weakness inherent in Endgame alone, where the resolution failed to resolve half the crap that actually happened during its 3-hour runtime. Time travel has bleached any semblance of what the past is anymore. Loki and Gamora are backed by the miracle of cinematic cheat codes a la alternate timelines. Thanos has been killed on 2 different occasions, before he got the stones and after he destroyed them. And I haven't even mentioned all the screw-ups the Avengers racked up with time travel when they completed their own quest for the stones. Just let time travel be the mechanism that creates the multiverse. Stop trying to put 1,000 different stipulations on who can and cannot be brought back to life, what circumstances are and are not irreversible, and restore the Infinity Stones to the juggernaut tools they rightfully are. All these problems had a very simple solution that the screenwriters either didn't consider or weren't willing to accept. Endgame had everything set up, all the stars aligned, to be an alternate timeline. One that was doomed and conclusively lost to Thanos, but could save other timelines from the same fate by traveling through time and collecting all the Infinity Stones. This is not as much of an overhaul as it first may seem. All that needed to be done was to expand the roster of the pre-snap timeline. Instead of just having Thanos, Gamora, and Nebula interact with the Time Heist Avengers, add in the heroes as well. When Tony, Steve, and Scott were trying to get the Space Stone in 2011, and Steve ended up having to literally fight his past self, that was hilarious. I love that scene. I can't see why Marvel decided to limit that to a one-off encounter instead of letting pre-snap Avengers join the fight. This could have culminated masterfully into the climax during the scene where all the heroes killed from the snap came through Doctor Strange's portals for round 2. But instead of coming back, they remained dead, and the heroes in their likeness from other timelines, dimensions, whatever, take a stand in their place. And once Thanos is defeated for good, we shift focus from the Avengers of Endgame's timeline, who have lost the battle but ultimately won the war by avenging their fallen heroes, to the flourishing one that was spared from Thanos. Phase 4 picks up there, with Spider-Man Far From Home. Why else jump 5 years into the future within the first 20 minutes of the film? Why else have Bruce Banner become Professor Hulk off screen? Why else have Hawkeye become vengeful and borderline criminal? It's a classic trope of a comic book multiverse. Having characters you know and love and twisting their roles, their identity, their fate. This seemed to be setting that up to a T. And frankly, that'd be a brilliant send-off for the Infinity Saga. It would have been a twist clever enough, to me anyway, that would retain the stakes that Infinity War had set up so well, without being forced in a direction Marvel had no intention of committing to for their future films. That's not to say what we got was a bad conclusion to Infinity War. Rather, it's a clumsy continuation for the MCU's future. The rules are muddied for what is and isn't possible for the Infinity Stones. The time travel is incoherent, if not completely contradictory. One more time. It didn't have to be this complicated. If we were now moving away from the 5-year future, semi-apocalyptic, Thanos-snapped universe, and turning towards the multiverse, where Peter Parker was never snapped out of existence, where Loki and Gamora weren't killed by Thanos, where time travel wasn't a viable solution any longer. It just becomes so much easier to reorient ourselves moving into Phase 4. The best thing Marvel can do at this point is close off time travel by some plot device or another, and going all in on the multiverse, as they should have done from the beginning. Anyway, that's my thoughts on reimagining Endgame. It's firmly in B tier as far as Marvel movies go.